Thank you very much. Now we'd like to start the keynote presentation. We are very happy to welcome Yukihiro Matsumoto, and he's the chairman of the executive committee of 2021 at Ruby World Conference, and also he's a chairman of the Ruby Association. And also, as you all know, he is well known as a creator of Ruby language. So he's going to give the presentation titled Vision, Value, Victory. Matsumoto-san, please. Good morning. Well, I said good morning already, but again, I appreciate the introduction. So my presentation title today is a Vision, Value, Victory. When I think about myself, I often describe myself as a dreamer. When I had a dream for the first time related to the computer, I was a high school student. I started the program perhaps at the end of junior high school, but anyhow, at that time, I used the language, program language BASIC. And the PC I was using was a little bit of sophisticated calculator. Pocket computer, it was called. But it was so slow, the memory was so small. So I did not know exactly, but I was stressed. But I was a junior high school student, so I was not sure why I felt stressed and what was wrong. I just thought maybe that's how the programming would be. But vaguely, I felt there should be something the better condition. When I went to the bookstore, I found the books on the programming. And then I realized that there were many programming languages that better than the BASIC I was using, and not just one, the multiple languages. And also I found out that they were designed by somebody for some intentions. So many people created, designed programming languages. So I thought maybe I could do that as well. Well, I don't know. I felt that way. I was interested in programming languages and I started to study. And I learned about the various functions of the different languages. So I thought, oh, this functions of this language is good. And I don't like this function of that language. So I wanted to pick all the good aspects of the different languages, and if I could put them together and create a language, I thought I could develop a language of a dream. But that was early 1980s, so there was no internet available for the common people. Maybe it existed already somewhere in the world, but at least not for someone like me. And also PC, which was available at that time, was, yes, I could run a BASIC somehow, but if you like to design and develop language, it wasn't a suitable environment. I had OS, and if you install a compiler, perhaps you could, but the compiler itself costed like 200,000 yen. It was beyond the reach for a junior high school student. So I went to the bookstore, but most of them were very sophisticated, like textbook for university. It was too difficult for the high school kid. I did not have a skill at that time. Although I wanted to design my own language, it was just a dream. And then I went to university and studied computer and software, and then graduated and joined a company, worked as a programmer, and I acquired a certain skill. And then I remembered my dream when I was a high school student. It was 1993. So it was already 10 years after I had a dream for the first time, and then I started to build the programming language. The name of the language was not Ruby at that time, but later I created language and named Ruby. And so in that way, the dream of the high school student came true 10 years later. So the Ruby, the language I created, was, for me, a great language. Because I created the language for me, it was the language I wanted to create. And then about 2 years, in 1995, and then I released on the web, internet, and I offered the language to everyone, saying this is a free software, so please try. And then increasing number of the people became interested and started to use. And then Ruby conference, the very first Ruby conference was held in 2001 in the world, Tampa, Florida, in the United States. So that was the very first conference, ACM. Just before the ACM conference, we used one room at a hotel, conference room. We had the first conference. So although I described it a conference, it was just 34 people getting together. Then recently, if you go to Ruby Kaigi in Japan, Ruby conference in the United States, you will see like 1,000 participants. So that was a quite small gathering, only 34 people getting together. But the Ruby was still young at that time. And then I was requested to give keynote speech. So it was only 34 people, I said, but it was about Ruby conference. And that was the first time for me to give keynote speech for Ruby. So there were people who came to join for the conference. So I thought at how I could describe the greatness of Ruby and why Ruby was a great language, and also I had to do that in English. So that was quite tough. And then the title I had at that time was a human-oriented programming in Ruby. So that was a title of the very first keynote speech I gave. There are many things good about Ruby, like productivity and so on and so forth. But to me, this human-orientedness. So people use programming language, and how do we feel? That feeling is important. So 2001, I think it was only Ruby that really focused on that aspect. So how people will feel when they interact with programming language. So that feeling is important. So I think realizing this importance was perhaps most important aspect for Ruby as a language. And then more people were interested in Ruby and the reputation increased. So it was originally the good language for me, but like I'm happy to see it became a good language, great language for us. So I think my dream came true, but still the vision, the true vision, is yet to achieve. There's more to go in the future, because I want to have an even greater language. The Ruby will become the greater, more productive, fun, and also faster than before. We will see Ruby is grow to be even the greater language. So that's my vision. So my vision is to make great language even greater language. And by doing that, we like to see the better world created by the great language, Ruby. And after vision, I like to talk about value. I am a programmer. So when I use Ruby as a programmer, these three words, as I told already, productive. So that means I can create the software I want to create in a shorter time. That's very important value. And also the feeling. I think its feeling is very important. So it should be fun to do the programming. And also programmers are really fond of competing. So we like to compete for faster performance. All these are values for programmer. But I think the value Ruby has is beyond that, beyond the values just for programmers. So even for those who are not programmers, Ruby can offer the value. So it may be a bit far-fetched example, but a few years ago, GitHub, well, I think the programmers, every programmer is familiar with GitHub, the site for the source codes. Microsoft acquired GitHub, and the value they paid at that time was $7.5 billion. Well, to calculate for Japanese yen, they multiplied it by 100, roughly speaking, but lots of money. Another company, Shopify, EC site. Their market value is $187 billion. Again, it's hard to imagine. The Shopify is the company in Canada. And this is the biggest market value in Canada. The founder of Shopify was a committer of Ruby on Rails. And the company is started by the Ruby on Rails committer has grown to be really the big company. So I would say the Shopify is really based upon Ruby and Rails. And another company I like to cite is in Japan, Smart HR. Their market value is 170 billion yen. Or 1.6 billion dollars. Sorry, I think the numbers, monetary values, are just too big to be real. But so they're big money, and I'm not saying they became successful just because thanks to Ruby only. They all made their own efforts. But still, I would say when they create the value and generate the profit, I think the Ruby contributed. So this is the what I downloaded today. You work for 4 days, and then you earn 820,000 yen a month. So which is quite good. So this advertisement for Python engineers. So value, we create a value. So technology can create a value. Ruby is one of such technologies. So as far as Ruby continues creating value, Ruby won't die. So when I think about vitality, is from creating value. So as far as we have vital community, Ruby won't die. So community is a key. But then how community die? Open source community would die. I actually saw one. There was Cmail. It was a mail reader for Emacs. Before I created Ruby, I was in charge of maintaining that software. I wasn't the creator, but I was part of the developing team. But then I was busy with Ruby, so I stopped working for the maintenance. So there was a successor to do the maintenance for the CMail. But well, perhaps the CMail was already too sophisticated, but my successor did not do much, did not add new features, did not make improvement, and then relative attraction of CMail declined, it seems. It's more than 20 years ago. So those users of CMail started to migrate to other options.
And last, the distribution of the contents, and finally, users do not use it anymore. There may be some source code, but actually, there is only a few persons who use CMail. So this is a community of the open software. Community does not die but fade away. And then the community activities would become less and less and then disappear at the end. And we can learn from this a lesson, which means that as far as we continue to go forward, we do not die. Now, Ruby is become a very good language, but it's not perfect. There's some room for improvement. Therefore, Ruby has to go on, and the environment around Ruby is changing dynamically. Therefore, we have to adapt to the changing situation, and the Ruby has to evolve. And what is the direction into which Ruby is evolving? I have to make decision because I'm a chief designer, but this is my vision. My vision toward the future of the Ruby is the improvement of tools, not just grammatical changes. That's done. I want to improve that. Static typing was introduced in Ruby 3.1, and the code checkers made improvement further. It may go much more, and GitHub Copilot. For instance, this is a code that you want to write, right? And this is a very interesting tool that complements the activity, and pair programming can be AI as a tool. And also, in order to find a bug, use the power of the computer. Probably it could be the even smarter debugger. And the attractiveness and productivity of the Ruby would advance. And we want to infuse more energy into this area. Another future would lie in the performance. Performance matters. Ruby is fast, very fast. For instance, GitHub is written in the Ruby, particularly in the part of the web. Therefore, nobody says that GitHub is too fast, but nobody says that's too slow to be useful. And Shopify, in the United States, if you look at the e-commerce site, Shopify is used, and nobody says that it's not good because it uses Ruby. Now, nobody complain with the high speed. Ruby 3x3, the high-speed project has been implemented. Ruby 3x3 Redux, this is a part 2. Ruby 3.x. Before that version, Ruby 3.0, compare with that, this will become 3 times faster than the Ruby 3.0 introduced last year. There are many things that we can do. For instance, a JIT compiler introduced recently should be better, and the JIT compiler, rather than heavyweight, we want a lightweight JIT so that we can make a realize high speed in wider area. shortly, Ruby 3.1 will be released, and the widgets, a lightweight widget will be introduced in there. So we would like to make evolve further multi-layer JIT. Now we need a high speed, and the JIT compiler can be implemented. And if it really in the inside of the loop and there are a lot of calls, code method should be optimized. And the JIT compiler would take time to optimize these most frequently caused method. And Lacta in Ruby 3.0. That is a parallel implementation code, and we can make it faster. And multi-core is used in most of the recent the computers, and the multiple the core can be used in parallel. Anyway, we have a lot of ideas. We work to think about it one by one, and if it's the effective, we would like to introduce it for better performance. That's the future that we envision, that we can obtain the results and we can create value. That is a victory of Ruby, as I see it. Now, the dream of my high school days to create a programming language is realized, and we want to make a great, exceptional programming language, which means that many people use globally, and I realize this dream also. I want to improve the language further, and I'm realizing this, the dream in Latin, veni, vici, vici. I came and I saw it and I won. I did a victory. This is the Kaiser's words, Caesar's words. And so we are winning in this context. I saw the dream came true. I had a dream and it came true. And I want to continue to realize my dream. And that is a victory of Ruby. 2005, 2006, in the beginning of the 2000s, Ruby became more famous, and since 2010, the Ruby became the top ranking popular the language, and now the Ruby is stable, and we are creating the value in a stable manner. So it's like a hype cycle. So actually, there was the illusion days around 2010. The people had a lot of good things about the Ruby, but now it's stable. And the ranking was the seventh in the programming language, the classifications, the seventh or eighth. Now, the most famous ranking, according to that, we are between 13th and 15th every month. Compared with previous times, the ranking is declined, and people say that Ruby is dead, and Ruby is the losing. Some people say that, but this is the nature of the human beings. People, we, human beings, would like to make it simple, one-dimensional, like ranking of the things. But for instance, the benefit of the Ruby, and also there are benefits of other languages. Toyota company is a world-class number one automotive company, but it's not that we all drive Toyota cars. We have Nissan, Mazda, Ferrari, and Lamborghini. We have a Toyota. That means that we don't need a Lamborghini. Therefore, we continue to improve our Ruby, and it's not a one-dimensional, but the unique value of the Ruby will be realized. That is, I think, is a victory of Ruby. I'm not doing alone. All of the people involved in Ruby would enjoy this victory. In the past and into the future, the Ruby continue to provide values, and that's our victory. This victory will create a better world. By creating a better world, we can win. GitHub didn't exist before, and now we have it, and more efficiently creates the programming. And for instance, compare with the days without Shopify, we can create a EC, and there are many things that we didn't have. And now with the services using the Ruby, the society became improved. Of course, without Ruby, some part of the society became better, but with IT and information technology, the world is becoming a better place in which Ruby is participating. And that is the raison d'etre of Ruby. As far as we continue to provide value, we continue to win. Vision, the victory value, the dream that I had alone in the past is creating the victory globally. Thank you very much for your attention.